Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. Let's do it. Chapter 10. Carly's edifice of hopes, dreams, aspirations, and struggles fell in ruins about her. It had been built upon false sands. It had no ideal for foundation. It had to fall. Something inevitable had forced her confession to rust. To rust? Let's go back. Was that rust was the... Yeah, okay, Rust was the soldier who had lost his leg. So I was getting confused with Hayes for a second there. Okay. Something inevitable had forced her confession to rust. Dissimulation had been a habit of her mind. It was more of a habit of her class than sincerity. But she had reached a point in her mental strife where she could not stand before Rust and let him believe she was noble and faithful, when she knew she was neither. Would not the next step in this painful metamorphosis of her character be a fierce and passionate repudiation of herself and all she represented? She went home and locked herself in her room, deaf to telephones and servants. There she gave up to her shame. Scorned, despised, dismissed by that poor, crippled, flame-spirited Virgil Rust. He had reverenced her, and the truth had earned his hate. Would she ever forget his look, incredulous, shocked, bitter, and blazing with unutterable contempt? Carly Birch was only another Nell, a jilt, a mocker of the manhood of soldiers. Would she ever cease to shudder at memory of Rust's slight movement of hand? Go! Get out of my sight. Leave me to my agony as you left Glenn Kilbourne alone to fight his. Men such as I am do not want the smile of your face, the touch of your hand. We gave for womanhood. Pass on to lesser men who loved the flesh pots and who would buy your charms. So Carly interpreted that slight gesture, and writhed in her abasement. Rust threw a white illuminating light upon her desertion of Glenn. She had betrayed him. She had left him alone. Dwarfed and stunted was her narrow soul. To a man who had given all for her, she had returned nothing. Stone for bread, betrayal for love, cowardice for courage. The hours of contending passions gave birth to vague, slow-forming revolt. She became haunted by memory pictures and sounds and smells of Oak Creek Canyon. As from afar she saw the great sculptured rent in the earth, green and red and brown, with its shining, flashing ribbons of waterfalls and streams. The mighty pines stood up magnificent and stately. The walls loomed high, shadowed under the shelves, gleaming in the sunlight, and they seemed dreaming. Waiting, watching. For what? For her return to their serene fastnesses, to the little gray log cabin. The thought stormed Carly's soul. Vivid and intense shone the images before her shut eyes. She saw the winding forest floor, green with grass and fern, colorful with flower and rock. 1,000 aisles, glades, nooks, and caverns called her to come. Nature was every woman's mother. The populated city was a delusion. Disease and death and corruption stalked in the shadows of the streets. But her canyon promised hard work, playful hours, dreaming idleness, beauty, health, fragrance, loneliness, peace, wisdom, love, children, and long life. In the hateful, shut-in isolation of her room, Carly stretched forth her arms as if to embrace the vision. Pale, close walls, gleaming placid stretches of brook, churning amber and white rapids, mossy banks and pine-matted ledges, the towers and turrets and ramparts where the eagles wheeled. She saw them all as beloved images, lost to her, save in anguished memory. She heard the murmur of flowing water, soft, low, now loud, and again lulling, hollow and eager, tinkling over rocks, bellowing into deep pools, washing with silky seep of wind-swept waves the hanging willows. Shrill and piercing, and far aloft pealed the scream of the eagle, and she seemed to listen to a mocking bird while he mocked her with his melody of many birds. The bees hummed, the wind moaned, the leaves rustled, the waterfall murmured. Then came the sharp, rare note of a canyon swift, most mysterious of birds, significant of the heights. A breath of fragrance seemed to blow with her shifting senses. The dry, sweet, tangy canyon smells returned to her, of fresh-cut timber, of wood smoke, of the cabin fire with its steaming pots, of flowers and earth, and of the wet stones, of the redolent pines and the pungent cedars. And suddenly, clearly, amazingly, Carly beheld in her mind's sight the hard features, the bold eyes, the slight smile, the coarse face of Hayes Ruff. She had forgotten him, but he now returned, and with memory of him flashed a revelation as to his meaning in her life. He had appeared merely a clout, a ruffian, an animal with man's shape and intelligence, but he was the embodiment of the raw, crude violence of the West. He was the eyes of the natural, primitive man, believing what he saw. He had seen in Carly Birch the paraded charm, the unashamed and serene front, the woman seeking man. Hayes Ruff had been neither vile, nor base, nor unnatural. That is absolutely crazy. It had been her... That was my... that was my embellishment. It had been her subjection to the decadence of feminine dress that had been unnatural. But Ruff had found her a lie. She invited what she did not want, and his scorn had been commensurate with the falsehood of her. So might any man have been justified in his insult to her, in his rejection of her. Hayes Ruff had found her unfit for his idea of dalliance. Virgil Rust had found her false to the ideals of womanhood for which he had sacrificed all but life itself. What then had Glenn Kilbourne found her? He possessed the greatness of noble love. He had loved her before the dark and changeful tide of war had come between them. How had he judged her? That last sight of him, standing alone, leaning with head bowed, a solitary figure, trenchant with suggestion of tragic resignation and strength, returned to flay Carly. He had loved, trusted, and hoped. She now saw what his hope had been, that she would have instilled into her blood the subtle, red, and revivifying essence of calling life in the open, the strength of the wives of earlier years, an emanation from canyon, desert, mountain, forest, of health, of spirit, of forward-gazing natural love, of the mysterious saving instinct he had gotten out of the West. And she had been too little, too steeped in the indulgence of luxurious life, too slight-natured and pale-blooded. And suddenly there pierced into the black storm of Carly's mind a blazing, white-streaked thought. She had left Glenn to the Western girl, Flo Hutter. Humiliated and abased in her own sight, Carly fell prey to a fury over jealousy. Man, this is terrible. Right. She went back to the old life, but it was in a bitter, restless, critical spirit, conscious of the fact that she could derive neither forgetfulness nor pleasure from it, nor see any release from the habit of years. One afternoon, late in the fall, she motored out to a Long Island club where the last of the season's golf was being enjoyed by some of her most intimate friends. Carly did not play. Aimlessly she walked around the grounds, finding the autumn colors subdued and drab, like her mind. The air held the promise of early winter. She thought that she would go south before the cold came, always trying to escape anything rigorous, hard, painful, or disagreeable. Later, she returned to the clubhouse to find her party assembled on an enclosed porch, chatting and partaking of refreshment. Morrison was there. He had not taken kindly to her late habit of denying herself to him. During a lull in the idle conversation, Morrison addressed Carly pointedly. "Well, Carly, how's your Arizona hog raiser?" he queried, with a little gleam in his usually lusterless eyes. "I have not heard lately," she replied coldly. The assembled company suddenly quieted, with a portent inimical to their leisurely content of the moment. Carly felt them all looking at her, and underneath the exterior she preserved with extreme difficulty there burned so fierce an anger that she seemed to have swelling veins of fire. "Queer how Kilbourne went into raising hogs," observed Morrison. "Such a low-down sort of work, you know." "He had no choice," replied Carly. "Glenn didn't have a father who made tainted millions out of the war. He had to work, and I must differ with you about its being low down. No honest work is that. It is idleness that is low down." "But so foolish of Glenn when he might have married money," rejoined Morrison sarcastically. "The honor of soldiers is beyond your ken, Mr. Morrison." He flushed darkly and bit his lip. "You women make a man sick with this rot about soldiers," he said, the gleam in his eye growing ugly. "A uniform goes to a woman's head no matter what's inside it. I don't see where your vaunted honor of soldier comes in, considering how they accepted the letdown of women during and after the war." "How could you see when you stayed comfortably at home?" retorted Carly. "All I could see was women falling into soldiers' arms," he said sullenly. "Certainly. Could an American girl desire any greater happiness, or opportunity to prove her gratitude?" flashed Carly, with proud uplift of head. "It didn't look like gratitude to me," returned Morrison. "Well, it was gratitude," declared Carly, ringingly. "If women of America did throw themselves at soldiers, it was not owing to the moral lapse of the day. It was woman's instinct to save the race. Always, in every war, women have sacrificed themselves to the future. Not vile, but noble. You insult both soldiers and women, Mr. Morrison. I wonder, did any American girls throw themselves at you?" Morrison turned a dead white, and his mouth twisted to a distorted checking of speech, disagreeable to see. "No, you were a slacker," went on Carly with scathing scorn. "You let the other men go fight for American girls. Do you imagine one of them will ever marry you? All your life, Mr. Morrison, you will be a marked man, outside the pale of friendship with real American men and the respect of real American girls." Morrison leaped up, almost knocking the table over, and he glared at Carly as he gathered up his hat and cane. She turned... Oh, Lordy. She turned her back upon him. From that moment he ceased to exist for Carly. She never spoke to him again. Next day Carly called upon her dearest friend, whom she had not seen for some time. "Oh, Carly, you don't look very well," said Eleanor, after greetings had been exchanged. "Oh, what does it matter how I look?" queried Carly impatiently. "You were so wonderful when you got home from Arizona." "If I was wonderful and am now commonplace, you can thank your old New York for it." "Oh, Carly, don't you care for New York any more?" asked Eleanor. "Oh, New York is all right, I suppose. It's I who am wrong." "Oh, my dear, you puzzle me these days. You've changed." "I'm sorry. I'm afraid you're unhappy." "Me? Oh, impossible. I'm in a seventh heaven," replied Carly with a hard little laugh. "What are you doing this afternoon? Let's go out riding or somewhere." "Oh, I'm expecting the dressmaker." "Where are you going tonight?" "A dinner and theatre. It's a party, or I'd ask you." "What did you do yesterday, and the day before, and the days before that?" Eleanor laughed indulgently and acquainted Carly with a record of her social wanderings during the last few days. "The same old things over and over again? Eleanor, don't you get sick of it?" Oh, yes, to tell the truth," returned Eleanor thoughtfully. "But there's nothing else to do." "Eleanor, I'm no better than you," said Carly with disdain. "I'm as useless and idle, but I'm beginning to see myself, and you, and all this rotten crowd of ours. We're no good. But you're married, Eleanor. You're settled in life. You ought to do something. I'm single and at loose ends. Oh, I'm in revolt. Think, Eleanor, just think. Your husband works hard to keep you in this expensive apartment. You have a car. He dresses you in silks and satins. You wear diamonds. You eat your breakfast in bed. You loll around in a pink dressing gown all morning. You dress for lunch or tea. You ride or golf, or, worse than, waste your time on some lounge lizard, dancing till time to come home to dress for dinner. You let other men make love to you. Oh, don't get sore. You do. And so goes the round of your life. What good on earth are you, anyhow? You're just a gratification to the senses of your husband. And at that, you don't see much of him." "Good Lord." "Carly, how you rave!" exclaimed her friend. "What's gotten into you lately? Why, everybody tells me you're queer. The way you insulted Morrison. How unlike you, Carly." "I'm glad I found the nerve to do it. What do you think, Eleanor?" "Oh, I despise him. But you can't say the things you feel." "You'd be bigger and truer if you did. Some day I'll break out and flay you and your friends alive." "But, Carly, you're my friend, and you're just exactly like we are. Or you were, quite recently." "Of course I'm your friend. I've always loved you, Eleanor," went on Carly earnestly. "I'm as deep in this damned stagnant muck as you or anyone, but I'm no longer blind. There's something terribly wrong with us women, and it's not what Morrison hinted." Oh, this is so bad. It's so bad. "Carly, the only thing wrong with you is that you jilted poor Glenn and are breaking your heart over him still." Don't, cried Carly, shrinking. "God knows that is true, but there's more wrong with me than a blighted love affair." "Yes, you mean the modern feminine unrest." "Eleanor, I positively hate that phrase, modern feminine unrest. It smacks of ultra, oh, I don't know what. That phrase ought to be translated by a Western acquaintance of mine, one Hayes Ruff. I'd like not to hurt your sensitive feelings with what he'd say, but this unrest means speed mad, excitement mad, fad mad, dress mad, or I should say undress mad, culture mad, and heaven only knows what else. The women of our set are idle, luxurious, selfish, pleasure-craving, lazy, useless, working children shirking, absolutely no good." "Well, if we are, who's to blame?" rejoined Eleanor spiritedly. "Now, Carly Birch, you listen to me. I think the 20th century girl in America is the most wonderful female creation of all the ages in the universe. I admit it. That is why we are a prey to the evils attending greatness. Listen, here's a crying sin, an infernal paradox. Take this 20th century girl, this American girl, who is the finest creation of the ages. A young and healthy girl, the most perfect type of culture possible to the freest and greatest city on earth, New York. She holds absolutely an unreal, untrue position in the scheme of existence, surrounded by parents, relatives, friends, suitors, and instructive schools of every kind, colleges, institutions. Is she really happy? Is she really living?"
"Eleanor," interrupted Carly earnestly, "she's not, and I've been trying to tell you why."
"Oh, my dear, let me get a word in, will you?" complained Eleanor. "You don't know it all. There are as many different points of view as there are people. Well, if this girl happened to have a new frock and a new beau to show it to, she'd say I'm the happiest girl in the world. But she's nothing of the kind. Only she doesn't know that. She approaches marriage, or for that matter, a more matured life, having had too much, having been too well taken care of, knowing too much. Her masculine satellites, father, brothers, uncles, friends, lovers, all utterly spoil her. Mind you, I mean girls like us, of the middle class, which is to say the largest and best class of Americans. We are spoiled. This girl marries, and life goes on smoothly, as if its aim was to exclude friction and effort. Her husband makes it too easy for her. She's an ornament or a toy to be kept in a luxurious cage. To soil her pretty hands would be disgraceful. Even if she can't afford a maid, the modern devices of science make the care of her 4-room apartment a farce. Electric dishwasher, clothes washer, vacuum cleaner, and the nearby delicatessen, and the caterer simply rob a young wife of her housewifely heritage. If she has a baby, which happens occasionally, Carly, in the spite of your assertion, it very soon goes to the kindergarten. Then what does she find to do with hours and hours? If she's not married, what on earth can she find to do?"
"Well, she can work," replied Carly bluntly.
"Oh, yes, she can, but she doesn't," went on Eleanor. "You don't work. I never did. We both hated the idea. You're calling spades spades, Carly, but you seem to be riding a morbid, impractical thesis. Well, our young American girl, or bride, goes in for being rushed, and she goes in for fads, the ultra stuff you mentioned. New York City gets all the great artists, lecturers, and surely the great fakirs. The New York women support them. The men laugh, but they furnish the money. They take the women to the theaters, but they cut out the reception to a Polish princess, a lecture by an Indian magician and mystic, or a benefit luncheon for a home for friendless cats. The truth is, most of our young girls or brides have a wonderful enthusiasm worthy of a better cause. What is to become of their surplus energy, the bottled lightning spirit so characteristic of modern girls? Where is the outlet for intense feelings? What use can they make of education or of gifts? They just can't. That's all. I'm not taking into consideration the new woman species, the faddist or the reformer. I mean normal girls like you and me. Just think, Carly, a girl's every wish, every need is almost instantly satisfied without the slightest effort on her part to obtain it. No struggle, let alone work. If women crave to achieve something outside of the arts, something universal and helpful, which will make men acknowledge her worth, if not the equality, where is the opportunity?"
"Opportunities should be made," replied Carly.
"There are a million sides to this question of the modern young woman, the fin de siècle girl. I'm for her."
"How about the extreme of style and dress for this remarkably to be pitied American girl you champion so eloquently?" queried Carly sarcastically.
"Immoral!" exclaimed Eleanor with frank disgust.
"You admit it?"
"To my shame, I do."
"Why do women wear extreme clothes? Why do you—"
Oh, this is so bad. Chris Alberti, this is a terrible, terrible book. Okay.
Why do women wear extreme clothes? Why do you and I wear open-work silk stockings, skirts to our knees, gowns without sleeves or bodices?
"We're slaves to fashion," replied Eleanor. "That's the popular excuse."
"Bah!" exclaimed Carly.
Eleanor laughed in spite of being half nettled. "Are you going to stop wearing what all the other women wear, and be looked at askance? Are you going to be dowdy and frumpy and old-fashioned?"
"No, but I'll never wear anything again that can be called immoral. I want to be able to say why I wear a dress. You haven't answered my question yet. Why do you wear what you frankly admit is disgusting?"
"Oh, I don't know, Carly. replied Eleanor helplessly.
"How you harp on things. We must dress to make other women jealous, and to attract men, to be a sensation. Perhaps the word immoral is not what I mean. A woman will be shocking in her obsession to attract, and hardly more than that, if she knows it."
Ah,
So few women realize how they actually do look. Hayes Ruff could tell them.
please don't be apologizing for Hayes Ruff.
"Hayes Ruff? Who in the world is he or she?"
asked Eleanor.
"Hayes Ruff is a he, all right," replied Carly grimly. "Well, who is he?"
"A sheep dipper in Arizona," answered Carly dreamily. I believe the correct term would be rapist, but...
"A sheep dipper in Arizona," answered Carly dreamily. "Huh. And what can Mr. Ruff tell us?" "He told me I looked like one of the devil's angels, and that I dressed to knock the daylights out of men." "Well, Carly Birch, if that isn't rich!" exclaimed Eleanor with a peal of laughter. "I dare say you appreciate that as an original compliment." "No. I wonder what Ruff would say about jazz. I just wonder," murmured Carly. "Well, I wouldn't care what he said, and I don't care what you say," returned Eleanor. "The preachers and reformers and bishops and rabbis make me sick. They rave about jazz. Jazz, the discordant note of our decadence. Jazz, the harmonious expression of our musicless, mindless, soulless materialism. The idiots. If they could be women for a while, they would realize the error of their ways, but they never will, but they will never abolish jazz. Never, for it is the grandest, the most wonderful, the most absolutely necessary thing for women in this terrible age of smotheration." "All right, Eleanor, we understand each other, even if we do not agree," said Carly. "You leave the future of women to chance, to life, to materialism, not to their own conscious efforts. I want to leave it to free will and idealism." "Carly, you're getting a little beyond me," declared Eleanor dubiously. "What are you going to do? It all comes home to each individual woman, her attitude toward life." "I'll drift along with the current, Carly, and be a good sport," replied Eleanor, smiling. "You don't care about the women and children of the future? You'll not deny yourself now, and think and work and suffer a little in the interest of future humanity?" "Oh, how you put things, Carly!" exclaimed Eleanor warily. "Of course I care, when you make me think of such things. But what have I to do with the lives of people in the years to come?" "Everything. America for Americans. While you dawdle, the lifeblood is being sucked out of our great nation. It is a man's job to fight. It is a woman's to save. I think you've made your choice, though you don't realize it. I'm praying to God that I'll rise to mine."
Carly had a visitor one morning, earlier than the usual or conventional time for calls.
"He wouldn't give no name," said the maid. "He wears soldier's clothes, ma'am, and is pale, and he walks with a cane." "Tell him I'll be right down," replied Carly. Her hands trembled while she hurriedly dressed. Could this caller be Virgil Rust? She hoped so, but she doubted. As she entered the parlor, a tall young man in worn khaki rose to meet her. At first glance she could not name him, though she recognized the pale face and light blue eyes, direct and steady. Who was it? "Good morning, Miss Birch," he said. "I hope you'll excuse so early a call. You remember me, don't you? I'm George Burton, who had the bunk next to Rust's." This is, oh, so he's another soldier from the hospital. There we go. "Ma'am." "Surely I remember you, Mr. Burton, and I'm glad to see you," replied Carly, shaking hands with him. Please sit down. Your being here must mean you're discharged from the hospital."
Yes, I was discharged all right," he said.
"Which means you're well again. That's fine. I'm very glad."
"I was put out to make room for a fellow in bad shape. I'm still shaky and weak," he replied. "But I'm glad to go. I've pulled through pretty good, and it'll not be long until I'm strong again. It was the flu that kept me down."
"You must be careful. May I ask where you're going and what you expect to do?"
Yes, that's what I came to tell you," he replied frankly. I want you to help me a little. I'm from Illinois, and my people aren't so badly off, but I don't want to go back to my hometown, down and out, you know. Besides, the winters are cold there. The doctor advises me to go to a little milder climate. You see, I was gassed and got the flu afterward. But I know I'll be all right if I'm careful. Well, I've always had a leaning toward agriculture, and I want to go to Kansas, southern Kansas. I want to travel around till I find a place I like, and there I'll get a job. Not too hard a job at first. That's why I need a little money. I know what to do. I want to lose myself in the wheat country and forget the war. I'll not be afraid of work presently. Now, Miss Birch, you've been so kind. I'm going to ask you to lend me a little money. I'll pay it back. I can't promise just when, but some day. Will you?"
"Assuredly I will," she replied heartily. "I'm happy to have the opportunity to help you. How much do you need for immediate use? $500?
"Oh, no, not so much as that," he replied. "Just railroad fare home, and then to Kansas, and to pay board while I get well, you know, and look around."
"We'll make it 500 anyway," she replied, and rising she went toward the library. "Excuse me a moment."
She wrote the check and returning, gave it to him.
"You're very good,"
he said, rather low.
"Not at all," replied Carly. "You have no idea how much it means to me to be permitted to help you. Before I forget, I must ask you, can you cash that check here in New York?"
"Oh, not unless you identify me," he said ruefully. "I don't know anyone I could ask."
"Well, when you leave here, go at once to my bank. It's on 34th Street, and I'll telephone the cashier, so you'll not have any difficulty. Will you leave New York at once?"
"Oh, I surely will. It's an awful place. 2 years ago, when I came here with my company, I thought it was grand, but I guess I lost something over there. I want to be where it's quiet, where I won't see many people."
"I think I understand," returned Carly. "Then I suppose you're in a hurry to get home? Of course, you have a girl you're just dying to see."
"No, sorry to say I haven't," he replied simply. I was glad I didn't have to leave a sweetheart behind when I went to France. But it wouldn't be so bad to have one to go back to now."
"Oh, don't you worry," exclaimed Carly. "You can take your choice presently. You have the open sesame to every real American girl's heart."
"And what is that?" he asked with a blush.
"Your service to your country," she said gravely.
"Well," he said, with a singular bluntness, "considering I didn't get any medals or bonuses, I'd like to draw a nice girl."
"You will,"
replied Carly, and made haste to change the subject.
By the way, did you meet Glenn Kilbourne in France?"
"Not that I remember," rejoined Burton, as he got up, rising rather stiffly by aid of his cane. "I must go, Miss Birch. Really, I can't thank you enough, and I'll never forget it."
"Will you write me how you're getting along?" asked Carly, offering her hand.
"Yes." Carly moved with him out into the hall and to the door. There was a question she wanted to ask, but found it strangely difficult of utterance. At the door, Burton fixed a rather penetrating gaze upon her. "You didn't ask me about Rust," he said.
"No, I didn't think of him. Until now, in fact,
Carly lied.
Of course, then you couldn't have heard about him. I was wondering. I've heard nothing. It was Rust who told me to come to you, said Burton. We were talking one day, and he thought you were true blue. He said he knew you'd trust me and lend me the money. I couldn't have asked you, but for him. True blue. He believed that. I'm glad. Has he spoken of me since I was last at the hospital? Hardly, replied Burton, with the straight, strange glance on her again.
Carly met this glance, and suddenly a coldness seemed to envelop her. It did not seem to come from within, though her heart stopped beating. Burton had not changed. The warmth, the gratitude still lingered about him, but the light of his eyes, Carly had seen it in Glenn's, in Rust's, a strange, questioning, far-off light, infinitely aloof and unutterably sad. Then there came a lift of her heart that released a pang. She whispered with dread, with a tremor, with an instinct of calamity.
How about Rust?
He's dead. The winter came, with its bleak sea winds and cold rains and blizzards of snow. Carly did not go south. She read and brooded and gradually avoided all save those true friends who tolerated her. She went to the theater. Yeah, I know. It was just very tossed aside. It's just like another layer of guilt just being like put upon her. Rose is all about that $500. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Good morning, Jelly Buns. Good morning. But today's chapter actually has been one of the worst. One of the worst. She went to the theater a good deal, showing preference for the drama of strife, and she did not go anywhere for amusement. Distraction and amusement seemed to be dead issues for her. But she could become absorbed in any argument on the good or evil of the present day. Socialism reached into her mind to be rejected. She had never understood it clearly, but it seemed to her a state of mind where dissatisfied men and women wanted to share what harder-working or more gifted people possessed. There were a few who had too much of the world's goods, and many who had too little. A readjustment of such inequality and injustice must come, but Carly did not see the remedy in socialism. Good Lord. Rose needs that smoke money. She devoured books on the war with a morbid curiosity, and hoped that she would find some illuminating truth as to the uselessness of sacrificing young men in the glory and prime of their lives. To her, war appeared a matter of human nature rather than politics. Hate really was an effect of war. In her judgment, future wars could be avoided only in two ways: by men becoming honest and just, or by women refusing to have children to be sacrificed. As there seemed no indication whatever of the former, she wondered how soon all women of all races would meet on a common height with the mounting spirit that consumed her own heart. Such time must come. She granted every argument for war, and flung against it one ringing, passionate truth: agony of mangled soldiers and agony of women and children. There was no justification for offensive war. It was monstrous and hideous. If nature and evolution proved the absolute need of strife, war, blood, and death, and the progress of animal and man toward perfection, then it would be better to abandon this Christless code and let the race of man die out. All through these weeks she longed for a letter from Glenn, but it did not come. Had he finally roused to the sweetness and worth and love of the Western girl, Flo Hutter? Carly knew absolutely, through both intelligence and intuition, that Glenn Kilbourne would never love Flo. Yet such was her intensity and stress at times, especially in the darkness of waking hours, that jealousy overcame her and insidiously worked its havoc. Peace and a strange kind of joy came to her in dreams of her walks and rides and climbs in Arizona, of the lonely canyon where it always seemed afternoon, of the tremendous colored vastness of that painted desert. But she resisted these dreams now, because when she awoke from them she suffered such a yearning that it became unbearable. Then she knew the feeling of the loneliness and solitude of the hills. Then she knew the sweetness of the murmur of falling water, the wind in the pines, the song of birds, the white radiance of the stars, the break of day and its gold-flushed close. But she had not yet divined their meaning. It was not all love for Glenn Kilbourne. Had city life palled upon her solely because of the absence of her lover? So Carly plodded on, like one groping in the night, fighting shadows. One day she received a card from an old schoolmate, a girl who had married out of Carly's set and had been ostracized. She was living down on Long Island at a little country place named Wading River. At a little country place named Wading River. Her husband was an electrician, something of an inventor. He worked hard. A baby boy had just come to them. Would not Carly run down on the train to see the youngster? That was a strong and trenchant call. Carly went. I was going to look up what trenchant, just make sure. Vigorous or incisive in expression or style. Okay. That was a strong and trenchant call. Carly went. She found indeed a country village, and on the outskirts of it a little cottage that must have been pretty in summer, when the green was on vines and trees. Her old schoolmate was Rosie, plump, bright-eyed, and happy. She saw in Carly no change, a fact that somehow rebounded sweetly on Carly's consciousness. Elsie prattled of herself and her husband and how they had worked to earn this little home, and then the baby. When Carly saw the adorable, dark-eyed, pink-toed, curly-fisted baby, she understood Elsie's happiness and revelled in it. When she felt the soft, warm, living little body in her arms against her breast, then she absorbed some incalculable and mysterious strength. What were the trivial, sordid, and selfish feelings that kept her in tumult compared to this welling emotion? Had she the secret in her arms? Babies and Carly had never become closely acquainted in those infrequent meetings that were usually the result of chance. But Elsie's baby nestled to her breast and cooed to her and clung to her finger. When at length the youngster was laid in his crib, it seemed to Carly that the fragrance and the soul of him remained with her. "A real American boy," she murmured. "You can just bet he is," replied Elsie. "Carly, you ought to see his dad." "I'd like to meet him," said Carly, thoughtfully. "Elsie, was he in the service?" "Yes, he was on one of the Navy transports that took munitions to France. Think of me, carrying this baby with my husband on a boat full of explosives, and with German submarines roaming the ocean. Oh, it was horrible." "But he came back, and now all's well with you," said Carly, with a smile of earnestness. "I'm very glad, Elsie." "Yes, but I shudder when I think of a possible war in the future. I'm going to raise boys, and girls too, I hope, and the thought of war is torturing." Carly found her return train somewhat late, and she took advantage of the delay to walk out to the wooded headlands above the Sound. It was a raw March day, with a steely sun going down in a pale gray sky. Patches of snow lingered in sheltered, brushy places. This bit of woodland had a floor of soft sand that dragged at Carly's feet. There were sere and brown leaves still fluttering on the scrub oaks. At length Carly came out on the edge of the bluff with the grey expanse of sea beneath her, and a long, wandering shoreline, ragged with wreckage or driftwood. The surge of water rolled in, a long, low, white, creeping line that softly roared on the beach and dragged the pebbles gratingly back. There was neither boat nor living creature in sight. Carly felt the scene ease a clutching hand within her breast. Here was loneliness and solitude, vastly different from that of Oak Creek Canyon, yet it held the same intangible power to soothe. The swish of the surf, the moan of the wind in the evergreens, were voices that called to her. How many more miles of lonely land than peopled cities? Then the sea. How vast! And over that the illimitable and infinite sky, and beyond the endless realms of space. It helped her somehow to see and hear and feel the eternal presence of nature. In communion with nature, the significance of life might be realized. She remembered Glenn quoting, "The world is too much with us. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers." What were our powers? What did God intend men to do with his hands and bodies and gifts and souls? She gazed back over the bleak land and then out across the broad sea. Only a millionth part of the surface of the unsubmerged earth knew the populous abodes of man. And the lonely sea, inhospitable to stable homes of men, was thrice the area of the land. Were men intended, then, to congregate in few places, to squabble and to bicker and breed the discontents that led to injustice, hatred, and war? What a mystery it all was! But nature was neither false nor little, however cruel she might be. Once again Carly fell under the fury of her ordeal. Wavering now, restless and sleepless, given to violent starts and slow spells of apathy, she was wearing to defeat. That spring day, 1 year from the day she had left New York for Arizona, she wished to spend alone. But her thoughts grew unbearable. She summed up the endless year. Could she live another like it? Something must break within her. She went out. The air was warm and balmy, carrying that subtle current which caused the mild madness of spring fever. In the park, the greening of the grass, the opening of buds, the singing of birds, the gladness of children, the light on the water, the warm sun, all seemed to reproach her. Carly fled from the park to the home of Beatrice Lovell, and there, unhappily, she encountered those of her acquaintance with whom she had least patience. They forced her to think too keenly of herself. They appeared carefree, while she was miserable. Over teacups there were waging gossip and argument and criticism. When Carly entered with Beatrice, there was a sudden hush, and then a murmur. "Well, hello, Carly. Now say it to our faces," called out Geralda Connors, a fair, handsome young woman of 30, exquisitely gowned in the latest mode, and whose brilliantly tinted complexion was not the natural one of health. "Say what, Geralda?" asked Carly. "I certainly would not say anything behind your backs that I wouldn't repeat here." "Eleanor's been telling us how you simply burned us up." "Well, we did have an argument, and I'm not sure I said all I wanted to." "Say the rest here," drawled a lazy, mellow voice. "For heaven's sake, stir us up. If I could get a kick out of anything, I'd bless it." "Carly, go on the stage," advised another. "You've got Elsie Ferguson tied to the mast for looks, and lately you're surely tragic enough." "I wish you would go somewhere far off," observed a third. "My husband is dippy about you." "Good Lord, this is, ma'am." Oh, I got some peeps popping out. What's up there? Good morning, Timo. Good morning, Timo. And Scorpion Knight. Man, how you guys doing? Yeah, we got a little crowd in here. Yeah. Tell you what, this book though, not good. Not good. I can't wait till we start another one. It's just been awful. All right. Let's get on with that. Oh boy, and it's particularly now we have like 5 women talking, which is that's just difficult there as well. Man, Joe, once this is done, we should just go over this and just like talk about all the terrible things in it. Man, girls, do you know that you actually have not one sensible idea in your heads? Retorted Carly. Sensible? I should hope not. Who wants to be sensible? Geralda battered her teacup on a saucer. Listen, she called. I wasn't kidding, Carly. I'm good and sore. She goes around knocking everybody and says New York backs Sodom off the boards. I want her to come out with it right here. I dare say I've talked too much, returned Carly. It's been a rather hard winter on me. Perhaps, indeed, I've tried the patience of my friends. See here, Carly, said Geralda deliberately. Just because you have had life turn to bitter ashes in your mouth, you have no right to poison it for us. We'll find it pretty sweet. You're an unsatisfied woman, and if you don't marry somebody, you'll end by being a reformer or fanatic. I'd rather end that way than rot in a shell, retorted Carly. I declare you make me see red, Carly, flashed Geralda angrily. No wonder Morrison roasts you to everybody. He says Glenn Kilbourne threw you down for some Western girl. If that's true, it's pretty small of you to vent your spleen on us. Carly felt the gathering of a mighty, resistless force, but Geralda Connors was nothing to her except the target for a thunderbolt. I have no spleen, she replied with a dignity of passion. I have only one pity. I was as blind as you. If heartbreak tore the scales from my eyes, perhaps that is well for me, for I see something terribly wrong in myself, in you, in all of us, in the life of today. You keep your pity to yourself. You need it, answered Geralda with heat. There's nothing wrong with me, or my friends, or life in good old New York. Nothing wrong, cried Carly. Listen, nothing wrong in you or life today, nothing for you women to make right. You're as blind as bats, as dead to living truth as if you were buried. Nothing wrong when thousands of crippled soldiers have no homes, no money, no friends, no work, in many cases no food or bed. Splendid young men who went away in their prime to fight for you and came back ruined, suffering. Nothing wrong when sane women with the vote might rid politics of partisanship, greed, crookedness. Nothing wrong when prohibition is mocked by women, when the greatest boon ever granted this country is derided and beaten down and cheated. Oh, wow, now she's all about the prohibition as well. Nothing wrong when there are 500,000 defective children in this country. Nothing wrong when there are not enough schools and teachers to educate our boys and girls, when those teachers are shamefully underpaid. Well, that hasn't changed in over 100 years. Nothing wrong when the mothers of this great country let their youngsters go to the dark motion picture halls, and night after night in thousands of towns all over this broad land see pictures that the juvenile court and the educators and keepers of reform schools say make burglars, crooks, and murderers of our boys and vampires of our girls. Okay, so now movies are poisoning. Okay, poisoning the youth. Nothing wrong when these young adolescent girls ape you and wear stockings rolled under their knees below their skirts and use a lipstick and paint their faces and darken their eyes and pluck their eyebrows and absolutely do not know what shame is. Nothing wrong when you may find in any city women standing at street corners distributing booklets on birth control. Nothing, good Lord.
Nothing wrong when great magazines print no page or picture without its sex appeal. Nothing wrong when the automobile, so convenient for the innocent little run out of town, presents the greatest evil that ever menaced American girls. Nothing wrong when money is God, when luxury, pleasure, excitement, speed are striven for. Nothing wrong when some of your husbands spend more of their time with other women than you. Nothing wrong with jazz, where the lights go out in the dance hall and the dancers jiggle and toddle and wiggle in a frenzy. Nothing... This is terrible. Nothing wrong in a country where the greatest college cannot report birth of one child to each graduate in 10 years. Nothing wrong with race suicide and, oh my Lord, and the incoming horde of oh, for fuck's sake. Excuse my French. Man, this is bad. This is just, you know, we're going to finish it because we're at 86%. I just want to say for the record, this boy, just, I don't know, this is terrible. You know, I'm not going to get too into it, right? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so boy, oh boy. Okay, so it sounds like this lady, she'd like to be building a wall as well. She can get stuffed. All right. Nothing wrong with you women who cannot or will not stand childbirth. Nothing wrong with most of you when, if you did have a child, you could not nurse it. Oh my God, there's nothing wrong with America except that she staggers under a titanic burden that only mothers of sons can remove. You doll women, you parasites, you toys of men, you silken-wrapped geisha girls, you painted, idle, purring cats, you parody of the female of the species, find brains enough if you can see the doom hanging over you and revolt before it's too late. Thank God that chapter's over. Unbelievable. Man, Zane Grey. Wow. Okay. How many more chapters are there to go? 11. There's 2 more chapters to go. That was ridiculous to read. That was just ridiculous. Well, it's not quite the end. 2 chapters to go. Man. That said, I do happen to know people like this in real life. So that hasn't changed in 100 years either. I think, boy, I mean, the, man. Okay. Let me just see how, I just want to see what this actually ends at. 97, 99, it actually ends at 100. Let me, boom, there we go. Okay, so that's 86, and the next chapter is at 94. Yeah, let's do one chapter. You know, we'll do one more chapter just to get this out of the way, and that'll leave us with one chapter to do tomorrow, and we can read the Lotus Eaters then again. This, but boy, oh boy. Okay, boy, I'm just. Chris Alberti. All right. Okay. Last time I listened to any suggestion by Chris Alberti. All right. Yeah, all the things she hates. She hates the jazz. She hates the foreigners. She hates women who aren't pumping out babies. She hates like
dresses a dress which shows a little ankle. She's totally in favor of prohibition. I don't know. Alrighty. Good morning, Anya. Good morning. We just read the worst chapter. There's probably the worst chapter I've ever read in any. Yeah. It was just what an awful person. What an awful person. Okay. Okay. Task list for Carly: move and don't leave Glenn your forwarding address. Work on boundaries so these toxic freaks don't get in your head. Man. No, that big rant, that was Carly. She has turned out to be the worst person. Boy, oh boy. Unbelievable. Jazz is bad because the lights go out in the dance hall and the dancers jiggle and toddle and wiggle in a frenzy. This is so. Then she's all concerned about race suicide. I mean, declining amounts of white people versus the incoming horde of foreigners. Man, what a terrible. All right. Yeah. Good Lord. Okay. Man, my opinion of Zane Grey is just like plummeted too. Good Lord. Okay, chapter 11. Yeah, it's I did not think she was gonna. I mean, she's turned alt-right. I don't get it. All right. 3 months in the country and it made her an idiot. Apparently. I don't know. Okay, chapter 11. Carly burst in upon her aunt. "Look at me, Aunt Mary," she cried, radiant and exultant. "I'm going back out west to marry Glenn and live his life." The keen old aunt. And what is it here? I'm going out there and I'm going to live his life. The keen old eyes of her aunt softened and... "Oh, dear Carly, I've known that for a long time. You've found yourself at last." Then Carly breathlessly babbled her hastily formed plans, every word of which seemed to rush her onward. "You're going to surprise Glenn again?" queried Aunt Mary. "Oh, I must. I want to see his face when I tell him." "Well, I hope he won't surprise you," declared the old lady. "When did you hear from him last?" "In January. It seems ages, but, Aunt Mary, you don't imagine Glenn—" "I imagine nothing," interposed her aunt. "It will turn out happen." The aunt's just trying to get rid of her now. I would too. Like, "Oh, you need money for a train ticket? There you go. Can only afford it one way. My bad." "I imagine nothing," interposed her aunt. "It would turn out happily, and I'll have some peace in my old age. But, Carly, what's to become of me?" "Oh, I never thought," replied Carly blankly. "It will be lonely for you. Auntie, I'll come back in the fall for a few weeks. Glenn will let me." "Let you? Ye gods, so you've come to that. Imperious Carly Birch, thank heaven you'll now be satisfied to be let to do things." I'd crawl for him," breathed Carly. "This is so bad." "Well, child, as you can't be practical, I'll have to be," replied Aunt May seriously. "Fortunately for you, I'm a woman of quick decision. Listen, I'll go west with you.
I want to see the Grand Canyon, and then I'll go on to California, where I have old friends I've not seen for years. When you get your new home all fixed up, I'll spend a while with you. And if I want to come back to New York now and then, I'll go to a hotel. It's settled. I think the change will benefit me." "Auntie, you make me very happy. I could ask no more," said Carly.
Man, oh boy, oh boy. None of that. Good gracious. All right. Swiftly as endless tasks could make them. Now they're multiplying. Now the aunt's in on it. Swiftly as endless tasks could make them, the days passed. But those on the train dragged interminably. Carly sent her aunt through to the canyon while she stopped off at Flagstaff to store innumerable trunks and bags. The first news she heard of Glenn and the Hutters was that they had gone to the Tonto Basin to buy hogs and would be absent at least a month. This gave birth to a new plan in Carly's mind. She would doubly surprise Glenn. Wherefore she took counsel with some Flagstaff businessmen and engaged them to set a force of men at work on the Deep Lake property, making the improvements she desired, and hauling lumber, cement, bricks, machinery, supplies, all the necessaries for building construction. Also, she instructed them to throw up a tent house for her to live in during the work, and to engage a reliable Mexican man with his wife for servants. When she left for the canyon, she was happier than ever before in her life. It was near the coming of sunset when Carly first looked down into the Grand Canyon. She had forgotten Glenn's tribute to this place. In her rapturous excitement of preparation and travel, the canyon had been merely a name. But now she saw it, and she was stunned. Oh, my goodness. Okay. What a stupendous chasm, gorgeous in sunset color on the heights, purpling into mystic shadows in the depths. There was a wonderful brightness of all the millions of red and yellow and gray surfaces still exposed to the sun. Carly did not feel a thrill, because feeling seemed inhibited. She looked and looked, yet was reluctant to keep on looking. She possessed no image in mind with which to compare this grand and mystic spectacle. A transformation of color and shade appeared to be going on swiftly, as if gods were changing the scenes of a titanic stage. As she gazed, the dark-fringed line of the north rim turned to burnished gold, and she watched that with fascinated eyes. It turned rose, it lost its fire, it faded to quiet cold gray. The sun had set. Then the wind blew cool through the pinions on the rim. There was a sweet tang of cedar and sage on the air, and that indefinable fragrance peculiar to the canyon country of Arizona. How it brought back to Carly remembrance of Oak Creek. In the west, across the purple notches of the abyss, a dull gold flare showed where the sun had gone down. You know, I wonder how long these books would be if you actually just took out all the extremely verbose descriptions of sunsets. Because it goes every chapter. All right. In the morning, at 8 o'clock, there were great irregular black shadows under the domes and peaks and escarpments. Bright Angel Cabin was all dark, showing dimly its ragged lines. At noon there were no shadows, and all the colossal gorge lay glaring under the sun. In the evening, Carly watched the canyon as again the sun was setting. Deep, dark blue shadows, like purple sails of immense ships, in wonderful contrast with the bright, sunlit slopes, grew and rose toward the east, down the canyons and up the walls that faced the west. For a long while there was no red color, and the first indication of it was a dull bronze. Carly looked down into the void, at the sailing birds, at the precipitous slopes, and the dwarf spruces, and the weathered old yellow cliffs. When she looked up again, the shadows out there were no longer dark. They were clear. The slopes and depths and ribs of rock could be seen through them. Then the tips of the highest peaks and domes turned bright red. Far to the east she discerned a strange shadow, slowly turning purple. One instant it grew vivid, then began to fade. Soon after that all the colors darkened, and slowly the pale gray stole over all. At night Carly gazed over and into the black void. But for the awful sense of depth, she would not have known the canyon to be there. A soundless movement of wind passed under her. The chasm seemed a grave of silence. It was as mysterious as the stars, and as aloof and as inevitable. It had held her senses of beauty and proportion in abeyance. At another sunrise, the crown of the rim, a broad belt of bare rock, turned pale gold under its fringed dark line of pines. The tips of the peak gleamed opal. There was no sunrise red, no fire. The light in the east was a pale gold under a steely green-blue sky. All the abyss of the canyon was soft, gray, transparent, and the belt of gold broadened downward, making shadows on the west slopes of the mesas and escarpments. Far down in the shadows she discerned the river, yellow, turgid, palely gleaming. By straining her ears, Carly heard a dull roar, as of distant storm. She stood fearfully at the extreme edge of a stupendous cliff, where it sheered, dark and forbidding, down and down into what seemed red and boundless depths of Hades. She saw gold spots of sunlight on the dark shadows, proving that somewhere, impossible to discover, the sun was shining through wind-worn holes in the sharp ridges. Every instant Carly grasped a different effect. Her studied gaze absorbed an endless changing. And at last she realized that sun and light and stars and moon and night and shade, all working incessantly and mutably over shapes and lines and angles and surfaces too numerous and too great for the sight of man to behold, made an ever-changing spectacle of supreme beauty and colorful grandeur. She talked very little while at the canyon. It silenced her. She had come to see it at the critical time of her life, and in the right mood. The superficialities of the world shrunk to their proper insignificance. Once she asked her aunt, why did Glenn not bring me here? As if this canyon proved the nature of all things. But in the end, Carly found that the rending strife of the transformation of her attitude toward life had insensibly ceased. It had ceased during the long watching of this cataclysm of nature, this canyon of gold-banded, black-fringed ramparts and red-walled mountains which sloped down to be lost in purple depths. That was final proof of the strength of nature to soothe, to clarify, to stabilize the tried and weary and upward-gazing soul. Stronger than the recorded deeds of saints, stronger than the eloquence of the gifted uplifters of men, stronger than any words ever written, was the grand, brooding, sculptured aspect of nature. And it must have been so because thousands of years before, the age of saints or preachers, before the fret and symbol and figure were cut in stone, man must have watched with thought-developing sight the wonders of the earth, the monuments of time, the glooming of the dark blue sea, the handiwork of God. The canyon is indeed pretty. In May, Carly returned to Flagstaff to take up with earnest inspiration the labors of home-building in a primitive land. It required 2 trucks to transport her baggage and purchases out to Deep Lake. The road was good for 18 miles of the distance, until it branched off to reach her land, and from there it was desert rock and sand. But eventually they made it, and Carly found herself and belongings dumped out into the windy and sunny open. The moment was singularly thrilling and full of transport. She was free. She had shaken off the shackles. She faced lonely, wild, barren desert, that must be made habitable by the genius of her direction and the labor of her hands. Always a thought of Glenn hovered tenderly, dreamily, in the back of her consciousness, but she welcomed the opportunity to have a few weeks of work and activity and solitude before taking up her life with him. She wanted to adapt herself to the metamorphosis that had been wrought in her. To her amazement and delight, a very considerable progress had been made with her plans. Under a sheltered red cliff among the cedars had been erected the tents where she expected to live until the house was completed. These tents were large, with broad floors high off the ground, and there were 4 of them. Her living tent had a porch under a wide canvas awning. The bed was a box-like affair, raised off the floor 2 feet, and it contained a great fragrant mass of cedar boughs upon which the blankets were to be spread. At one end was a dresser with a large mirror and a chiffonier. The chiffonier, that's the oval. I think that's there's like the mirror which has the little pivot in the middle. You can like spin it around. I think you can change the angle. I think let's look it up. No, it's not. It's a low cupboard. Okay, either used as a sideboard or with a raised bookshelf on top. Okay. Tall chest, or in America, it's just a tall chest of drawers. Okay, all right. Okay. Okay. What do they call those mirrors then? You hope Glenn had hooked up with a cabaret girl. Maybe. It's possible. There were a table and lamp, a low rocking chair, a shelf of books, a row of hooks upon which to hang things, a washstand with its necessary accessories, a little stove, and a neat stack of cedar chips and sticks. Navajo rugs on the floor lent brightness and comfort. Carly heard the rustling of cedar branches over her head and saw where they brushed against the tent roof. It appeared warm and fragrant inside, and protected from the wind, and a subdued white light filtered through the canvas. Almost she felt like reproving herself for the comfort surrounding her, for she had come west to welcome the hard knocks of primitive life. It took less than an hour to have her trunk stored in one of the spare tents, and to unpack clothes and necessaries for immediate use. Carly donned the comfortable and somewhat shabby outdoor garb she had worn at Oak Creek the year before, and it seemed to be the last thing needed to make her fully realize the glorious truth of the present. "I'm here," she said to her pale yet happy face in the mirror. "The impossible has happened. I have accepted Glenn's life. I have answered that strange call out of the west." She wanted to throw herself on the sunlit woolly blankets of her bed and hug them, to think and think of the bewildering present happiness, to dream of the future. But she could not lie or sit still, nor keep her mind from grasping at actualities and possibilities of this place, nor her hands from itching to do things. It developed presently that she could not have idled away the time even if she had wanted to, for the Mexican woman came for her with smiling gesticulation and jabber that manifestly meant dinner. Carly could not understand many Mexican words, and herein she saw another task. This swarthy woman and her slow-eyed husband favorably impressed Carly. Next to claim her was Hoyle, the superintendent. "Miss Birch," he said, "in the early days we could run a log cabin in a jiffy. Axes, horses, strong arms, and a few pegs. That was all we needed. But this house you've planned is different. It's good you've come to take the responsibility." Carly had chosen the site. Oh boy, a lot of metals coming down from Timo. Nice. Carly had chosen the site for her home on top of the knoll where Glenn had taken her to show the magnificent view of mountains and desert. Carly climbed it now with beating heart and mingled emotions. 1,000 times already that day, it seemed, she had turned to gaze up at their noble, white-clad peaks. They were closer now, apparently looming over her, and she felt a great sense of peace and protection in the thought that they would always be there. But she had not yet seen the desert that had haunted her for a year. When she reached the summit of the knoll and gazed out across the open space, it seemed that she must stand spellbound. How green the seeded foreground, how grey and barren the downward slope, how wonderful the painted steps. The vision that had lived in her memory shrank to nothingness. The reality was immense, more than beautiful, appalling in its isolation, beyond comprehension with its lure and strength to uplift. But the superintendent drew her attention to the business at hand. Carly had planned an L-shaped house of 1 story. Some of her ideas appeared to be impractical, and these she abandoned. The framework was up, and 6 carpenters were lustily at work with saw and hammer.
"We made better progress if this house was in an ordinary place," explained Hoyle. "But you see, the wind blows here, so the framework had to be made as solid and strong as possible. In fact, it's bolted to the sills."
Both living room and sleeping room were arranged so that the painted desert could be seen from one window, and on the other side the whole of the San Francisco mountains. Both rooms were to have open fireplaces. Carly's idea was for service and durability. She thought of comfort in the severe winters of that high latitude, but elegance and luxury had no more significance in her life. Hoyle made his suggestions as to changes and adaptations, and receiving her approval, he went on to show her what had already been accomplished. Back on higher ground, a reservoir of concrete was being constructed near an ever-flowing spring of snow water from the peaks. This water was being piped by gravity to the house, and was a matter of great satisfaction to Hoyle, for he claimed that it would never freeze in winter, and would be cold and abundant during the hottest and driest of summers. This assurance solved the most difficult and serious problem of ranch life in the desert. Next, Hoyle led Carly down off the knoll to the wide cedar valley adjacent to the lake. He was enthusiastic over its possibilities. 2 small corrals and a large one had been erected, the latter having a low, flat barn connected with it. Ground was already being cleared along the lake, where alfalfa and hay were to be raised. Carly saw the blue and yellow smoke from burning brush, and the fragrant odor thrilled her. Mexicans were chopping the cleared cedars into firewood for winter use. What's up with that with the tacos? All right. The day was spent before she realized it. At sunset, the carpenters and mechanics left in 2 old Ford cars for town. The Mexicans had a camp in the Cedars, and the Hoyles had theirs at the spring under the knoll where Carly had camped with Glenn and the Hutters. Carly watched the golden rosy sunset, and as the day ended she breathed deeply, as if in unutterable relief. Supper found her with appetite she had long since lost. Twilight brought cold wind, the staccato bark of coyotes, the flicker of campfires through the cedars. She tried to embrace all her sensations, but they were so rapid and many that she failed. The cold, clear, silent night brought back the charm of the desert. How flaming white the stars! The great spire-pointed peaks lifted cold, pale gray outlines up into the deep, star-studded sky. Carly walked a little to and fro, loath to go to her tent, though tired. She wanted calm, but instead of achieving calmness, she grew more and more towards a strange state of exaltation. Westward, only a matter of 20 or 30 miles, lay the deep rent in the level desert, Oak Creek Canyon. If Glenn had been there, this night would have been perfect, yet almost unendurable. She was again grateful for his absence. What a surprise she had in store for him, and she imagined his face in its change of expression when she met him. If only he never learned of her presence in Arizona until she made it known in person. That she most longed for. Chances were against it, but then her luck had changed. She looked to the eastward, where a pale luminosity of afterglow shone in the heavens. Far distant seemed the home of her childhood, the friends she had scorned and forsaken, the city of complaining and striving millions. If only some miracle might illumine the minds of her friends, as she felt that hers was to be illumined here, in the solitude. But she well realized that not all problems could be solved by a call out of the West. Any open and lonely land that might be saved any open and lonely land that might have saved Glenn Kilbourne would have sufficed for her. It was the spirit of the thing, and not the letter. It was work of any kind, and not only that of ranch life, not only the raising of hogs. Carly directed stumbling steps toward the light of her tent. Her eyes had not been used to such black shadow along the ground. She had, too, squeamish feminine fears of hydrophobia skunks and nameless animals or reptiles that were imagined denizens of the darkness. She gained her tent and entered. The Mexican, Gino, as he had called himself, had lighted her lamp and fire. Carly was chilled through, and the tent felt so warm and cozy that she could scarcely believe it. She fastened the screen door, laced the flaps across it, except at the top, and then gave herself up to the lulling and comforting heat. There were plans to perfect, innumerable things to remember, a car and accessories, horses, saddles, outfits to buy. Carly knew she should sit down at her table and write and figure, but she could not do it then. For a long time she sat over the little stove, toasting her knees and hands, adding some chips now and then to the red coals, and her mind seemed a kaleidoscope of changing visions, thoughts, feelings. At last she undressed and blew out the lamp and went to bed. Did not know fears could be feminine fears. Well, I know. If I saw a rabid skunk, I'd be running the other way too. Yeah, this is this book is not good like that. Oh, that's the only Spanish you know. Oh, all right. Oh, it's a handy one to know. Handy one to know there, Rose. Blah, 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 blah. He went to bed. Okay. Instantly a thick blackness seemed to enfold her, and silence, as of a dead world, settled down upon her. Drowsy as she was, she could not close her eyes nor refrain from listening. Darkness and silence were tangible things. She felt them, and they seemed suddenly potent with magic charm to still the tumult of her, to soothe and rest, to create thoughts she had never thought before. Rest was more than selfish indulgence. Loneliness was necessary to gain consciousness of the soul. Already far back in the past seemed Carly's other life. By and by the dead stillness awoke to a faint sound. Blah, blah. Okay, I need to stop for a little drink of water here, because boy, oh boy. Oh! Amazed I haven't already. Wow, hour and a half and I haven't had it again. Man! I was so excited by the, so excited by that previous chapter there. I forgot to hydrate up. Oh yeah, there we go. I guess they can be, if no self-respecting man of testosterone would ever have that fear. This is like Zane Grey creating his waifu. I don't know. I don't know. I think a waifu might be a little too Japanese for Mr. Zane Grey. Uh-huh. There we go. Oh, go. Oh, boy, that's a little better. All right. Oh, by the way, you can kind of see these foam things behind me, right? Yeah, this whole thing is just all the way around. Yeah, it was and ceiling. Great. Now, yeah, but I just don't know why the overlays are not working. I'm actually very sad about that. Turn it off and on. Do I need to do it? It's not local. It doesn't need to be. I mean, it's there. And it's on the right layer. Yeah. Okay, we'll get back to our book. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. Show. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know why. Okay, let's get back to it. No. We do have we got a little bit of a rush there, Giona, because as soon as this book is over and done with, I'll be cheering. Right. Okay. By and by, the dead stillness awoke to faint sounds not before perceptible to her. A low, mournful sough of the wind in the cedars, then the faint, far-distant note of a coyote, sad as the night and infinitely wild. Days passed. Carly worked in the mornings with her hands and her brains. In the afternoon she rode and walked and climbed with a double object, to work herself into fit physical condition and to explore every nook and corner of her 640 acres. Then what she had expected and deliberately induced by her efforts quickly came to pass. Just as the year before she had suffered excruciating pain from aching muscles and saddle blisters and walking blisters, and a very rending of her bones, so now she fell victim to them again. In sunshine and rain she faced the desert. Sunburn and sting of sleet were equally to be endured, and that abomination, the hateful blinding sandstorm, did not daunt her. But the weary hours of abnegation to this physical torture at least held one consoling recompense as compared with her experience of last year, and it was that there was no one interested to watch for her weaknesses and failures and blunders. She could fight it out alone. 3 weeks of this self-imposed strenuous training wore by before Carly was free enough from weariness and pain to experience other sensations. Her general health, evidently, had not been so good as when she had first visited Arizona. She caught cold and suffered other ills attendant upon an abrupt change of climate and condition. But doggedly she kept at her task. She rode when she should have been in bed. She walked when she should have ridden. She climbed when she should have kept to level ground. And finally, by degrees so gradual as not to be noticed, except in the sum of them, she began to mend. Meanwhile, the construction of her house went on with uninterrupted rapidity. When the low, slanting, wide-eaved roof was completed, Carly lost further concern about rainstorms. Let them come. When the plumbing was all in, and Carly saw verification of Hoyle's assurance that it would mean a gravity supply of water, ample and continual, she lost her last concern as to the practicability of the work. That, what? Off? What's off? Yeah. That and the earning of her. It's not the stream, is it? Okay, gave me a heart attack there. I thought you meant maybe the stream had shut off. We were having like big, we were having like big frame drops yesterday. Boy, oh boy. Blah, blah, blah. That and the earning of her endurance seemed to bring closer a wonderful reward, still nameless and spiritual, that had been unattainable, but now breathed to her on the fragrant desert wind and in the brooding silence. The time came when each afternoon's ride or climb called to Carly with increasing delight, but the fact that she must soon reveal to Glenn her presence and transformation did not seem to be all the cause. She could ride without pain, walk without losing her breath, work without blistering her hands, and in this there was compensation. The building of the house that was to become a home, the development of water resources and land that meant the making of a ranch, these did not altogether constitute the anticipation of content. To be active, to accomplish things, to recall to mind her knowledge of manual training, of domestic science, of designing and painting, to learn to cook, these were indeed measures full of reward, but they were not all. In her wondering, pondering meditation, she arrived at the point where she tried to assign to her love the growing fullness of her life. This, too, splendid and all-pervading as it was, she had to reject. Some exceedingly elusive and vital significance of life had insidiously come to Carly. One afternoon, with the sky full of white and black rolling clouds and a cold wind sweeping through the cedars, she halted to rest and escape the chilling gale for a while. In a sunny place under the lee of a gravel bank, she sought refuge. It was warm here because of the reflected sunlight and the absence of wind. The sand at the bottom of the bank held a heat that felt good to her cold hands. All about her and over her swept the keen wind, rustling the sage, sweeping the sand, swishing the cedars, but she was out of it, protected and insulated. The sky above showed blue between the threatening clouds. There were no birds or living creatures in sight. Certainly the place had little of color or beauty or grace, nor could she see beyond a few rods. How long, what distance is a rod? Doesn't say in this one here. There's got to be a unit of measurement. Certainly the place had little of color or beauty or grace, nor could she see beyond a few rods. Lying there, without any particular reason that she was conscious of, she suddenly felt shot through and through with exhilaration. Another day, the warmest of the spring so far, she rode a Navajo mustang she had recently bought from a passing trader, and at the farthest end of her section, in rough wooded and ridged ground she had not explored, she found a canyon with red walls and pine trees and gleaming streamlet and glades of grass and jumbles of rock. It was a miniature canyon, to be sure, only 1/4 of a mile long, and as deep as the height of a lofty pine, and so narrow that it seemed only the width of a lane, but it had all the features of Oak Creek Canyon, and so sufficed for the exultant joy of possession. She explored it. The willow brakes and oak thickets harbored rabbits and birds. She saw the white flags of deer running away down the open. Up at the head, where the canyon boxed, she flushed a flock of wild turkeys. They ran like ostriches and flew like great brown chickens. In a cavern, Carly found the den of a bear, and in another place the bleached bones of a steer. She lingered here in the shaded depths with a feeling as if she were indeed lost to the world. These big, brown and seamy barked pines, with their spreading, gnarled arms and webs of green needles, belonged to her, as also the tiny brook, the bluebells smiling out of the ferns, the single stalk of mescal on the rocky ledge. There's about the overlays. Oh, yeah, no, it's no, I got some real basic ones. Got some on here, like the chat is supposed to be it's in a box above my head, which is for whatever reason not showing up. Don't know why. Yeah, I don't have them all over the place like I do from the other place. Blip, blip. Yeah. Never had sun and earth, tree and rock seemed a part of her being until then. She would become a sun worshipper and a lover of the earth. That canyon had opened there to sky and light for millions of years, and doubtless it had harbored sheep herders, Indians, cliff dwellers, barbarians. She was a woman with white skin and a cultivated mind, but the affinity for them existed in her. She felt it, and that was an understanding of it. No, she felt it, and that an understanding of it would be good for body and soul. Another day she found a little grove of jack pines growing on a flat, mesa-like bluff, the highest point of her land. The trees were small and close together, mingling their green needles overhead and their discarded brown ones on the ground. From here, Carly could see afar to all points of the compass, the slow green descent to the south, and the climb to the black timbered distance, the ridged and canyoned country to the west, red vents choked with green and rimmed with gray. To the north, the grand upflung mountain kingdom crowned with snow, and to the east, the vastness of illimitable space, the openness and wildness, the chaste and beaten mosaic of colored sands and rocks. Again and again she visited this lookout and came to love its isolation, its command of wondrous prospects, its power of suggestion to her thoughts. She became a creative being, in harmony with the live things around her. The great life-dispensing sun poured its rays down upon her as if to ripen her, and the earth seemed warm, motherly, immense with its all-embracing arms. She no longer plucked the bluebells to press to her face, but leaned to them. Every blade of grama grass, with its shining bronze-tufted seed head, had significance for her. The scents of the desert began to have meaning for her. She sensed within her the working of a great leveling process through which supreme happiness would come. June. The rich, thick amber light, like a transparent reflection from some intense golden medium, seemed to float in the warm air. The sky became an azure blue. In the still noontides, when the bees hummed drowsily and the flies buzzed, vast, creamy white columnar clouds rolled up from the horizon like colossal ships with bulging sails, and summer, with its rush of growing things, was at hand. Carly rode afar, seeking in strange places the secret that eluded her. Only a few days now until she would ride down to Oak Creek Canyon. There was a low, singing melody of wind in the cedars. The earth became too beautiful in her magnified sight. A great truth was dawning upon her, that the sacrifice of what she had held as necessary to the enjoyment of life, that the strain of conflict, the labor of hands, the forcing of weary body, the enduring of pain, the contact with the earth, had somehow served to rejuvenate her blood, quicken her pulse, intensify her sensorial faculties, thrill her very soul, lead her into the realm of enchantment. One afternoon, a dull, lead-colored... One afternoon, a dull... the place that shall not be named. Man. It's hard to keep track of what he's describing. It's just so many words for all of it. One afternoon, a dull, lead-black-colored cinder knoll tempted her to explore its bare heights. She rode up until her Mustang sank to his knees and could climb no farther. From there she essayed the ascent on foot. It took labor, But at last she gained the summit, burning, sweating, panting. The cinder hill was an extinct crater of a volcano. In the center of it lay a deep bowl, wondrously symmetrical, and of a dark, lusterless hue. Not a blade of grass was there, not a plant. Carly conceived a desire to go to the bottom of this pit. She tried the cinders of the edge of the slope. They had the same consistency as those of the ascent she had come, but here there was a steeper incline. A tingling rush of daring seemed to drive her over the rounded rim, and once started down, it was as if she wore 7-league boots. Fear left her. Only an exhilarating emotion consumed her. If there were danger, it mattered not. She strode down with giant steps. She plunged. She started avalanches to ride them until they stopped. She leaped, and lastly she fell to roll over the soft cinders to the pit. There she lay. It seemed a comfortable resting place. The pit was scarcely 6 falls into a crevasse and is now missing 4. Yeah, boy, oh boy. No search parties around, that's for sure. The pit was scarcely 6 feet across. She gazed upward and was astounded. How steep was the rounded slope on all sides? There were no sides. It was a circle. What? How steep was the rounded slope on all sides? There were no sides. It was a circle. She looked up at a round lake of deep translucent sky. Such depth of blue, such exquisite rare color. Carly imagined she would gaze through it to the infinite beyond. She closed her eyes and rested. Soon the laboring of heart and breath calmed to normal, so that she could not hear them. Then she lay perfectly motionless. With eyes shut, she seemed still to look, and what she saw was the sunlight through the blood and flesh of her eyelids. It was red, as rare a hue as the blue of sky. So piercing did it grow that she had to shade her eyes with her arm. Again the strange, rapt glow suffused her body. Never in all her life had she been so absolutely alone. She might as well have been in her grave. She might have been dead to all earthly things, and reveling in spirit in the glory of the physical that had escaped her in life. And she abandoned herself to this influence. She loved these dry, dusty cinders. She loved the crater here, hidden from all save birds. She loved the desert, the earth, above all, the sun. She was a product of the earth, a creation of the sun. She had been an infinitesimal atom of inert something that had quickened to life under the blazing magic of the sun. Soon her spirit would abandon her body and go on, while her flesh and bone returned to dust. This frame of hers, that carried the divine spark, belonged to the earth. She had only been ignorant, mindless, feelingless, absorbed in the seeking of gain, blind to the truth. She had to give. She had been created a woman. She belonged to nature. She was nothing save a mother of the future. She had loved neither Glenn Kilbourne nor life itself. False education, false standards, false environment had developed her into a woman who imagined she must feed her body on the milk and honey of indulgence. She was abased now, woman as animal, though saved and uplifted by her power of immortality. Transcendental was her female power to link life with the future. The power of the plant seed, the power of the earth, the heat of the sun, the inscrutable creation spirit of nature, almost the divinity of God, these were all hers because she was a woman. That was the great secret, aloof so long. That was what had been wrong with life. The woman blind to her meaning, her power, her mastery. So she abandoned herself to the woman within her. She held out her arms to the blue abyss of heaven as if to embrace the universe. She was nature. She kissed the dusty cinders and pressed her breast against the warm slope. Her heart swelled to bursting with a glorious and unutterable happiness. That afternoon, as the sun was setting under a gold-white scroll of cloud, Kali got back to Deep Lake. A familiar lounging figure crossed her sight. It approached to where she had dismounted. Charlie, the sheep-herder of Oak Creek. "Oh, howdy," he drawled, with his queer smile. I've totally forgotten which voice I gave Charlie. "Howdy," he drawled, with his queer smile. "So it was you who had this Deep Lake section?" "Yes, and how are you, Charlie?" she replied, shaking hands with him. "Me? Oh, I'm tip-top. I'm sure glad you got this ranch. I reckon I'll hit you up for a job." "I'd give it to you, but aren't you working for the Hutters?" "Nope, not any more. Me and Stanton had a row with them." How droll and dry he was, his lean olive-brown face, with its guileless clear eyes, and his lanky figure in blue jeans, vividly recalled Oak Creek to Kali. "Oh, I'm sorry," returned she, haltingly, somehow checked in her warm rush of thought. "Stanton, did he quit too?" "Yep, he sure did." What was the trouble?" "Reckon because Flo made up to Kilbourne," replied Charlie with a grin. "Ah, I see," murmured Kali. A blankness seemed to wave over her. It extended to the air without, to the sense of the golden sunset. It passed. What should she ask? What out of 1,000 sudden flashing queries? Are the Hutters back?" "Sure, been back several days. I reckon Hoyle told you. Maybe you didn't know, though, for nobody's been to town." How are they all?" faltered Kali. There was a strange wall here between her thought and her utterance. "Everybody satisfied, I reckon," replied Charlie. "Flo, how's she?" burst out Kali. "Oh, Flo's loony over her husband," drawled Charlie, his clear eyes on Kali's. "Husband?" she gasped. "Sure, Flo's gone and went and done what I swore on." "Who?" whispered Kali, and the query was a terrible blade piercing her heart. "Now who do you reckon on?" asked Charlie, with his slow grin. Kali's lips were mute. "Well, it was your old beau that you wouldn't have," returned Charlie, as he gathered up his long frame, evidently to leave. "Kilbourne. He and Flo came back from the Tonto, all hitched up." There we go. And that was that's a good place to it is bang on noon. There we go. Not bad. 2 hours on the dot.